Yeah, yeah, thank you. I'm right by my cash.
I'd like to call the August 11th, 2014 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Ms. Walton, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Newsom,
Here.
Mr. Pons,
Here.
Mayor Holman,
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryland,
Here.
Mr. Foster.
Here.
Our first item on the agenda today are items for the City Council meeting of August 14th. We begin with public comment period. If anyone wishes to address any item on the upcoming agenda for Thursday or any other item they wish to bring before City Council, please do so. I have one speaker's card, and that is from Mr. John Whitley. John, welcome.
Mr. Mayor, members of the City Council, I'm John Whitley, and I live at 110 Governor Berkeley Road. This is sort of not necessarily a repeat performance, but a return to the issue of traffic safety issues on Governor Berkeley Road. If I may, Mr. Mayor, I want to thank you for visiting the area last week. I wish there had been more traffic to substantiate what we see there daily, but I do appreciate your taking your time to come by to see. I have to present to Council a petition that is coming from all of the residents on Governor Berkeley Road, including the person at the corner of Tyler Brooks and Governor Berkeley Road. And if I may, I'd like to share with you most of what's here and then submit this to you for record and send it to you, Mr. Mayor, via email. Governor Berkeley Road is the connector between Long Hill and Richmond Road and is cited as a shortcut. At least 5 families with small children have moved to Governor Berkeley within the last 6 years. We live in houses facing Governor Berkeley Road and observe daily unsafe traffic conditions impacting our lives. Vehicles speed through, skip the farms and Governor Berkeley Road. Large trucks and buses use our street as their route to Richmond and Long Hill Road. Repeatedly, there has been asking of folk within the city to please, by the residents, to address the unsafe traffic conditions on Governor Berkeley Road. Each of the individuals that has spoken to or has engaged a member of city staff has documented emails and telephone conversations. On July 10th, I was here, on July 10th, on behalf of all the residents of Governor Berkeley Road, I was here representing our neighbors, and I appealed directly to you in session, asking your intervention and citing the unsafe traffic conditions as I witnessed daily by the residents. The just one death or injury of an adult or child proclamation was presented to council member, to city manager, chief police, and director of public utilities. On the morning of July 11th, the day after the presentation to city council, received an email from the city manager, citing the results of a directed traffic study conducted by the police department, wherein the chief of police reported to the city manager and the director of public utilities, it appears there were no hazardous situations observed on Governor Berkeley Road that I should report to Mr. Tuttle and Mr. Clayton at this time. The police department conducted their study from June 30 to July 6 using flashing watch your speed signs and a total of 22 patrols during morning hours throughout the day and to the evening hours over that 7-day period, as confirmed by the report to the chief of police. That was approximately three visits per day. The directed patrols traffic study only proves to us that when police signs and vehicles are present, motorists will comply with posted traffic regulations. 25 miles per hour, no traffic, no trails, tractors or trailers. Watch for children. In an effort to appease us to some degree about the traffic safety measures, 2 large watch for children and 25 mile per hour signs were installed about 3 weeks ago. The action that we're being petitioned for, we're concerned citizens who urge our leaders to act now to intervene to stop the unsafe traffic issues created by speeding vehicles and large trucks, tour buses on Governor Berkeley Road. We live in homes facing Governor Berkeley and observe every single day these unsafe conditions. Following is a list of some recommended interventions, presented several times with a simple request, just pick one of these as an initial intervention. 1, double lines on Governor Berkeley Road from Thomas Nelson to Long Hill. 2 speed bumps similar to the ones installed in Newtown. 3, three-way stop signs and markings at the intersection of Tyler Brooks Road and Governor Berkeley Road. 4, cobblestone intersection at Tyler Brooks Road and Governor Berkeley Road. And or lastly, close Governor Berkeley Road through traffic. We petition the City of Williamsburg to take immediate action to protect the health and safety of the residents from these unsafe conditions, and to remember just one death or injury of a child or an adult is not the legacy you want for our great city. I'll hand this forward with the original copy of the signatures. Since December of last year, there has been an exchange of emails and other types of information about this. Admittedly, in a couple of them, I became a little contentious, and to whomever is listening, I apologize. I sent you this morning, Mayor Holman, and to City Council, a note, an email, citing that while I'm ultimately appreciative of the fact that you feel that maybe if we put another sign there coming in either entrance that says if you go over 25 miles per hour, you're going to be hit with a $200 fine. But I must insist that signs don't appear to affect traffic conditions on Governor Berkeley Road, and I've talked with some of the neighbors, not all on here, but some, and we do not think another sign is really worthwhile. We ask that you attend to the suggestions that we brought to you, and in order of priority or preference, have cited that the three-way stop at Tyler Brooks and Governor Berkeley would be quite amenable and totally acceptable. And also the double yellow lines, because studies have shown that when demarcation lines are cast, that it does have a psychological effect on travelers. Thank you.
Thank you, John. And I think I appreciate your efforts here, and I think that given the petition and the names of the individuals listed there, I think city staff will be in touch. I think it would be useful probably to have a meeting with city staff and the residents to talk about sort of the pros and cons of various options, and then I think we will come together with a package that I hope will satisfy you and your neighbors, and I think make a difference there. Jack, do you want to add anything to that?
No, I think that says it very well.
So, John, we look forward to working with you to solve this.
We appreciate it.
So, thank you. Anybody else wish to address City Council on any matter? Jack, Council preview, anything in particular you want to?
Nothing in particular to point out. We have the agendas for Thursday, as you've seen, and as they've been posted. And if you have any questions of us at this time, we'd be happy to get any additional information you need between now and Thursday.
Any questions? Okay, thanks. Our next order of business of background presentations and discussions. We have two. The first is a report on street pavings from Public Works Director Dan Clayton. Dan, welcome.
Hi. Mayor, City Council. First, I'm going to talk a little about how we come up with our annual budget for paving, and then I'm going to turn it over to Ralph Patterson, and Ralph will talk about several items such as the paving types we have, the upcoming streets we're going to pave next spring, and basically how we determine which streets we're going to pave. He's been in charge of our program for the last 20 years, so he's well versed on that. In terms of the budget, our annual budget, first thing you need to do on that is to figure out how often your streets need to be repaved. And based on our research and based on our experience, it kind of boils down to a range of between every 12 to 15 years to be paving the streets. Now, that's a very general average because of obviously your primary streets will be done more often than that, and some of the subdivision streets less often. I know in some cases in subdivision streets we can go 20 years and the street looks fine. Well, based on that frequency rate, and given the fact we know what the asphalt cost is, we know how many lane miles we have, and we know how many tons it takes to pave a lane mile, we kind of landed in the range of $450,000 each year to get our streets paved on a regular basis. Unfortunately, some of those variables are changing. As you know, the petroleum products are going up quite a bit, so we're tending to get a little less of our roads paved than we'd like to see. Talked to Jack about this in the past, and we may have to bump that number up if we want to stay on that same frequency, on the paving frequency of, say, 12 to 15 years between paving. Like I said, I want to reemphasize that this paving is very general. If somebody's going to come call me and say, my street hasn't been paved in 20 years, well, it probably doesn't need it. So, but it's a pretty wide range, but particularly on our newer subdivisions, tends to be a better, with the equipment we have these days and the base they put underneath the roads, it's much more sophisticated, and our streets are lasting a lot longer than some of the older streets we've had in town. So, we've even gotten over 20 years on some of those streets. And finally, one of the challenges we face is in our city, and a lot of other cities, is the fact that we have a lot of utilities underground on our streets. Not necessarily the case in all of VDOT streets. So we're all the time making repairs or replacements and that kind of thing. So we tend to ding our streets up quite a bit with all these utilities. And as you know, we're into this underground wiring, same thing there. A lot of times they end up by necessity in the street. So we have to deal with that. So you'll get patches along the way, and I know some of you might have a few patches along your street right now. I won't mention any names, but so anyway, with that said, Rob's going to come up now and talk to you about some of the other questions you raised.
Ralph, welcome.
Thanks, sir. I'll start off, I'll talk a little bit about paving maintenance, and I guess one of the reasons we're here is Jamestown Road has had its problems. Most of our city streets, the entrance corridors in the city are concrete under the asphalt. That's why they were built in those days. It was a material of the time. Asphalt became a little more prevalent in the mid-'50s. That's when they started developing it throughout the rest of the country and made it easier for people to use. So obviously our roads are prior to that, so that's why we have concrete underneath our roads. Cap Landing, Merrimack Trail, York Street, Jamestown, Richmond Road, 2nd Street all have concrete underneath the roads. Some of them give us a hard time and some do not. It just depends, I guess, on the technique at the time on when it was installed. The cracks that we see in our roads, the ones with concrete underneath, they come represent the expansion joints that are underneath the road. These concrete panels are poured into panels, and between the panels they put expansion material in there because concrete through the seasons expands and contracts. In the summertime, these joints will be really tight because the panels are expanded, and of course in the wintertime it gets cold, they shrink, and the panels open up, and that causes these reflective cracks to come back through to the asphalt surface. When we pave a road, after over top of the concrete road, we'll pave a continuous sheet of asphalt. So asphalt is referred to as a flexible pavement because it has some elasticity to it, and concrete is rigid. It either breaks or it holds together. Through time, asphalt loses some of its flexibility, and that's when there's expansion and contraction of these concrete panels. At some point, the asphalt just tears, and you end up with a joint there, and it reflects through there. Some of the things we can do would be, well, one of them, for instance, is just remove the panels and reconstruct the road, which is extremely inconvenient and expensive as well. Something VDOT has done years ago is referred to as crack and seat, where they destroyed or broke up all the concrete into smaller chunks and then paved 4 to 5 inches over top of it and kind of created that as a base underneath the asphalt road system. It didn't work out as well as everybody hoped through VDOT. They found out they needed to be putting somewhere around 8 to 10 inches of asphalt on these roads to make it last as long as they wanted it to. Well, in our environment, we can't do that because we can't raise our roads much more than a couple inches, and we create a whole lot of problems. It's not a practical option for us. Another option you'll see up and down the interstate where they've had bad panels, so what they'll do is they'll cut 6 foot on either side and re-pour a new panel in there. Well, now we end up with 3 cracks instead of 1. So that's not exactly what we're trying to accomplish either. And it works very well for interstate because it's a continuous a concrete road, so it's not affected by that. In the past, what we pretty much have been doing is we'll mill and pave the roads when the joints get to be too bad, which is pretty much in their life cycle and it needs to be done. It works out well for us that way. a new technique that was used in 2006 when we rebuilt Richmond Road. It was done under VDOT took the reins on that when they rebuilt the road. And they had I'll call it a binder, the 3/4 inch thick binder that they put on top of the concrete that was supposed to keep the reflective cracking from coming through to our surface mix. It's done a good job. It's on the expensive side, to get it done, but it was something that was fairly new, and it's done well. Is it cost effective for us to do at this point? I'd like to have another 4 years or so and see how it looks. For instance, Jamestown Road, it's been 13 years since we paved it. It's time, without a doubt, to get that one taken care of. A temporary fix for us on Jamestown Road is to go in there and grind hot spots off. We have a little grinder, and we go and just knock all the hot spots off and level it up and make it a little more rideable for the people until next year, which is in our paving schedule for next year. Somebody's asked a question about a black asphalt goes down. It is really dark. It's black. To start with, we use brownstone in all the asphalt. We like that warm, rich color we get in the 4 or 5 years it takes for the brownstone to show through. And obviously, it's a tar base and the petroleum product, and it's covered in tar, and it just takes time for this to wear off. And it's the 4 to 5 years. It's done A, by tire travel, and B, some through environment does it as well, because otherwise underneath all these parked cars it'd still be black, but somehow the environment, the temperatures and the rain and snow, whatever, help remove the tar from the top of the road, so we get that nice brown color in there. How we pick our roads, the side of the streets we're going to pave. Each year we visually inspect all of our roads, and we rate them on a scale of really needs it, it's getting close, or it could wait another 2 years possibly. But we'll rate all the roads, look at every road in town and rate them. We use maintenance records. We keep track of, actually we have a GIS map that shows when a road was paved, so we can back up through the years and see how often it was done, and was, I think I've gone back to mid-'80s with the data we have today. VDOT has provided us some information from time to time on road conditions through some of the technology they use on their roads. We'll take that into account as well. Once we have all the information, we'll sit down and do a cost estimate to how much it costs to pave that section of roadway, and put them on, and just kind of go down the list. We'll set them up according to their need. We have a certain budget, $450,000 to work with, and we'll pave the roads that we can get done in that given year. And what doesn't get done gets put into next year's folder, and it'll be reevaluated for all roads again next year. And pretty much how we determine our roads. It's not rocket science, but it seems to work well for us. Heavy vehicles are detrimental to our road system. They go hard on our roads. And one thing we've done recently, council has done recently, is we've reduced our trash truck and recycling truck vehicle traffic by half. So that's going to really help the subdivisions, because it definitely just get a little more life out of them. They'll have these big trucks running back and forth up through the subdivisions, and that will definitely gain some more years for us. We still have to deal with CW buses and water buses, and to some degree, the trolleys. They aren't particularly heavy, but they run the roads, and a lot of times you can follow the path of the buses. They take a good bit of life out of our roads, but that's just part of what we do here, and keep things working. State funding. This year, well, starting next year actually, but it started, our application period was this year. The state has got a new program where they will provide funds for localities, cities that pave their own streets, they'll pay the bill to have state routes that go from the county into that city to be paved, which would be routes like Route 5 and 60. So that again can help us down the road. It's a new program. There was only about $3 million in there this year statewide, so it's not a lot to work with. And it was based on road conditions, is how they're going to pick and choose road conditions as well as vehicular traffic per day, ADTs. We don't expect anything, but we can always hope, and we can definitely put it to use if it comes our way. These roads are driven by route numbers versus street names. For instance, Route 60 comes in from the north on Richmond Road. goes down Bypass, goes down Page Street, and goes up York Street. So that would be our state route for Route 60, how that would run through town. Another program the state opened up to us a couple of years ago was revenue sharing. It was new to paving of roads. They've been out there for a number of years, but this is the first time it's been for paving. Well, this year we applied for funds for next year. It's a matching program, so our budget is $450,000, and VDOT approved us to have $450,000. So our paving budget next year is going to be $900,000. So it'll be substantial for us, for our little town. It'll be good for us. Next year's schedule, we're looking at North Henry Street from the railroad tracks out to the corporate limit of 132. We'll be doing Capitol Landing between Lafayette and Page, that piece through there. Jamestown Road from Lake Matoka to Boundary Street. We'll be doing York Street from the corporate line to Page Street, all of Merrimack Trail, and all of Yorkshire. We will also be doing Indian Springs next year. And we also in revenue, we have a separate revenue project going on, which is the York Street corridor project, which will be going at the same time. Again, it's a revenue sharing of it, and that will hopefully start construction, later this year and be done by summer of next year. And that one will incorporate new sidewalks, new curb and gutters, some landscaping, and new street lights. That's what I have.
Ralph, thank you. That's really a lot of very good information and some good news for next year. Let me turn to council and see if they have any questions for you or for Dan.
Mr. Patterson, has there not been any success with, you talked about the fill for the gaps in the concrete that VDOT was trying out to see if that would help with the expansion and contraction of the concrete. It just seems like there ought to be materials that are going to give enough that they can expand as the concrete shrinks and shrink as it expands, so that you don't get the same gaps created. Is that what that fill product tries to do?
Well, no, the binder was actually about a half-inch layer that's put on the surface of the road,
Okay.
on top of the concrete, and that would, I guess, the makeup of it was such a way that would absorb some of this movement that didn't get reflected through, and so that's what I think we're trying to accomplish with that.
But the problem is that there are physical gaps between these concrete panels when they shrink.
Material was put in there once upon a time, and you've seen the big black snakes on the interstate where it's come out, riding along, and it comes out, and VDOT has to go back and put it in time. I don't know what they did years ago. Was there most likely gone, whatever material they would use in those days. But I don't know.
It's not that different from having a concrete walkway or exposed aggregate, and you've got those pieces of wood. That's exactly what they're doing. They're serving as those expansion joints. Talk a little bit more about the brownstone and the asphalt that we're using. Are you saying that the asphalt we use now is no different than what we might have been using 30 years ago? It's just the newer material just hasn't worn down to get the same look yet?
Years ago, 30 years ago, there was a better source of brownstone than we have today. Brownstone is used in a lot of things, like exposed aggregate sidewalks, the curb and gutters. So there's other resources out there that are using our product that we use for our asphalt. And another problem we've had, and we were kind of slow maybe to catch on, was that a lot more recycled material is being included in asphalt, and therefore we're introducing gray stones and white stones from the other people's roadways that have been milled down, and that number keeps increasing every year. And VDOT's trying to find that happy medium where they can include as much recycled material as possible, but not go to a point where it's detrimental to the asphalt. So we don't have the roads we used to, unfortunately.
Ralph, you also might want to make a distinction between the brownstone overlay as opposed to the asphalt with brownstone as the aggregate, because we still have a lot of brownstone overlay streets, which is entirely different technology. Go ahead.
You want me to expand on that one?
Yeah.
Okay. We'll have the older subdivisions, such as Indian Springs, and some of the old Haynes Drive, some of the older streets that were done with using tar and gravel. We go in and shoot some tar in and throw some stone down, a little more tar, and another layer of stone. We call it a two-course shot. And We don't do that anymore. It's gotten to be difficult. It's hard to find people who do that. It's so temperature sensitive of when you can do it. If it's too humid, the stone won't stick, and too dry, the stone won't stick. There seems to be a lot of reasons why it does not work out well for us, and we've gotten away from it, and we just don't do it anymore. And that's one of the reasons we think it's a benefit to have the brown stone in your road. It's not instantaneous like when I come through and do the tar and gravel on there. But it comes through. Just give us a couple of years, and it will wear through. We did see a lot of whiter roads in the past because of this milling materials that was included into it. And last year we went strictly virgin mix. There was no recycled material put in it because we were getting away from where we were trying to go. We like that nice brown hue. It gave us character. When you come from James City County, you know exactly where the corporate line is. I mean, it's night and day. You can't miss it.
And I'll also add that the brownstone in the mix that eventually will come through with the weathering will never be as brown as the tar and brownstone overlay, where all you see on top of that is brown gravel. And that's the treatment that is not done anymore and hasn't been for about the last 15 years since we've done that with any regularity. So therefore, when a street, a subdivision like Indian Springs that was last done with that treatment in the 1990s is repaved, when it goes down there, it will be, those streets will look like black asphalt, just like the ones out here in downtown that were done. And so that's the reason why, and we just have to live with it.
And you're saying they will wear with time to a different color, but it won't be to the degree that they
Right.
did before.
They won't ever look like, the other streets look like just like a gravel, brown gravel.
Aggregate.
Yeah, it's totally exposed aggregate.
Yeah.
There is no tar on top because it's a different process altogether.
But you can see that Newport Avenue was done, what, 2 years ago?
Correct, yes, sir.
And if you go now, I mean, you already can see that, and Boundary Street was done even longer ago than that, and you can really see sort of those, so you can see sort of over time it does, but you're right, it's never going to be the same as the brownstone gravel streets, but those are also, as you say, technologically problematic. Is that
They
the
are.
way to put
We've
it?
had all kinds of complaints. I mean, people that walk the dog and then you got tar and track all over the carpet and they get tar, and the kids on the bicycles and the baby carriages and.
It's a challenge to ride on the street. Okay. Scott, any questions?
Mr. Patterson, thank you. We do get a lot of questions on this, so this is very good.
No?
Yeah, thank you. Can you talk a little bit about how weather affects the roads? For example, I know this winter was particularly wet and cold. Maybe you could talk about what that effect is on the road systems, creating potholes.
What happens when we have the kind of winter we had, this cold and a lot of rain, what happens is, the roads we have cracks in our roads just from time. They just get cracks in them and water gets in them, freezes and expands. And that's how we start developing our potholes is water gets in there, gets underneath the road system, and if it's cold, really cold for a number of days, below freezing, that piece of ice water turns to ice, it'll break loose, and that's how we start developing our potholes. It's a matter of just getting in those cracks and expanding.
It would seem to me, I mean, a lot of what people are experiencing is not really normal because of the cold winter that we had and seeing all these potholes, and particularly along Jamestown Road, as water gets in there and freezes and does just that. So, thank you.
Judy?
No, thank you very much.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, so I was very interested in your talking about sort of the various techniques, because some of our major roads have those concrete sort of bases to them, and but Richmond Road seems to have been having very different experiences than, say, Merrimack Trail or Jamestown Road, and so. But you're saying you want to wait a few more years to really see whether that technologies will make that long run difference.
Correct. I'm actually working to get some numbers. We're back to the company. I want to find out how much it's going to cost us to do this and what kind of life that material has when we come back and say 3 or 4 years to do Richmond Road. Can I just mill off an 1.5 inch and leave that binder, or do I need to remove the expensive binder and put it back again? So kind of got a little bit of a feel for it. And as you've seen, our roads, each one acts a little bit different. And Capilano has got a bunch of break, there's little joints in it, and all these reflect, but it's a smooth riding road. In Jamestown, it's doing different.
Just to follow up on that,
Sure.
when you go to do Jamestown Road, for example, are you going to put down this barrier, or?
I don't know that yet.
Okay.
I mean, by next year. We'll do our homework and talk with the manufacturer. It's a patented item, so it comes from one source.
Gotcha.
So we'll do our homework and find out if this is financially feasible for somebody.
I was thinking you don't want to pave it and miss an opportunity, because once you pave it, you're not going down for another 10 years, and if it means holding off for another year, would it be worth waiting until you have all that information?
Oh, great.
But you got it under control.
I think so.
Yeah, thank you.
Well, Dan and Ralph, thank you very much for this. This has been really useful and lots of information. So thanks again. Our next presentation is the William and Mary Student Outreach. Jody?
Good afternoon, Mayor, members of Council. Before you this afternoon is a list of all the outreach activities that are being planned to welcome back William and Mary students this fall. It's hard to believe that we're talking about the fall semester already. A lot of the activities that you'll see before you go back to 2009, when a joint paper was released between the city and the college, you'll recall. The goal of that paper was to list a number of activities that the city and the college would commit to improve relations and goodwill among all parties and improve the quality of life for all city neighborhoods. So I want to take a moment this afternoon and just briefly go over a list of a lot of the major outreach activities that are being planned for this fall. The first one is with our fire department doing fire safety training with the RAs, and that begins on the 15th. Our welcome signs, if you recall, we have 8 welcome signs which we install on the major commercial corridors coming into town. And they'll be installed the week of August 18th. And they just are a simple sign that says Williamsburg welcomes William and Mary students back into town. The mayor will be doing his welcome for new students on August 22nd. The police department will be participating in the orientation fair on August 23rd. We are in our final sponsorship season with AV Adventure. This is the interactive tour for new students, freshmen and both transfer students, and that's being scheduled for August 25th this year. If you recall, that's the interactive technology, mobile technology tour that really helps introduce new students to city businesses and to the downtown area of Williamsburg. On August 28th, we'll be having our Symphony Under the Stars community concert at Lake Matoka Amphitheater, and this is put on by the Virginia Symphony. During the mid-August, early September timeframe, when students are back in town, we do extra patrols in those neighborhoods close to the college, just to make sure we get off on a right foot as the school semester starts. The Renter's Guide that's mailed out by the Neighborhood Relations Committee, that'll be mailed out in early September. And then the city, for a number of years, has put together an online city student guide, and that's emailed out to students about mid-September. So I just wanted to give council just a moment to kind of update you on where we are with all the activities that are planned for this fall. I'm happy to answer any questions the council may have.
Thank you. Yes, it's hard to believe that school starts soon. Any questions?
Ms. Miller, in the past, I have this recollection of police and fire going around door to door in the neighborhoods near the college, just introducing themselves, offering to be a resource, reminding folks of long-term residents, maybe saying hello if they happen to knock on their door, but really just trying to create that sense of contact so they're not always perceived as a threatening presence. Do we still do that? Or is that part of the extra duty officers and bike patrols in the neighborhood?
Actually, a lot of that work happens with the Neighborhood Relation Committee, and that's the brochure that they mail out. So that work that we work sort of going door to door. And when people were home, it was successful, but we found sometimes it was challenging to get people home during the day. So a lot of that sort of work as far as sharing that type of information happens through the Neighborhood Relations Committee. And that group works with police, fire, codes compliance, those kinds of groups to get that information out.
Scott?
It would seem to me that since 2009, that relationship between students and new arriving students in the city seems to be much better than it had been in the past. At least that's my perception. And I think activities such as this goes along, such as what you've outlined here, go along with making sure that relationship stays a positive relationship. So I hope we continue that, and I guess the Neighborhood Relations Committee works with you, putting together kind of this type of program so that we don't miss an opportunity.
We do, and these are just really the more formal things. There are lots of informal activities and opportunities for communication and information sharing that happens throughout the fall semester with all city offices and departments. So this is just sort of the main ones that are coming up.
But I think it's good because these new students coming in are part of the community, and what we're trying to do is to integrate them as well as we can to make them help them understand that it's not an adversarial relationship. We're all in this together. So, thank you.
Yeah, but just to jump in there, I think both the neighborhood council, works actively with neighbors, encouraging them to go out and meet their neighbors and what have you. And we're working with the ESA. We also encourage students who live in neighborhoods to get out and meet their neighbors and what have you. And I think those efforts, as you suggested, over the last few years have begun to make a real difference. And so I think it is just, there's no silver bullet, but I think there are a number of things that we've started doing that have made a difference.
And some communities will do their own,
That's right, yeah.
not city events, but just for their own neighborhood that work very well.
Yeah, Griffin and Newport Avenue, Barbara Ramsey and Janet Smith have every year put together a neighborhood picnic for students and residents, and that's been a really successful effort led by two neighbors.
Good.
Judy? Okay.
I have one more thing.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about this before, but I guess in the classes start, what day?
Classes start the
27th?
25th.
25th? Okay.
That Monday.
So at least within the week and a half prior, it's going to be a high tide for parents moving kids into houses, particularly off-campus neighborhoods. We've kind of talked about in the past having maybe a parking leniency holiday. I've had several complaints of people's parents getting tickets as they were actively moving their kids into a house. So if we could maybe do some sort of softening effort within a narrow window of time to account for that, I think that'd be smart.
I mean, we're used to move-in day, the big day.
The big day,
Yeah.
right.
But you're talking about a week or so in advance, and it's not,
Because there is no
Okay.
one off-campus move-in day.
Right.
There's a period of time.
period of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay, we'll definitely look at that. I'll have a conversation with the chief of police. And again, I would, if you do hear of someone that has a particular issue, send them our way.
Okay, good.
Thanks. Anything else on this? Okay, thanks. Our next order of business is City Council communications. We have two. The first is a discussion about the Beautification Advisory Committee. And earlier this year, Mr. Hertzler, who is the chair of the Beautification Committee, and Joe's here today, so thank you for being here, sent us a letter making some suggestions about the Beautification Committee and its role and its organizational structure. Working with him and having discussions with staff as well as members of the Beautification Committee, I put together a communication that I shared with council suggesting a way forward. And what I wanted to do today is see if we can have a discussion of that and think about whether this is a direction to go or do we want to think about something else. And as a result of Mr. Hertzler's communication and really thinking about sort of the Beautification Committee and the way it was set up, and what was it, 1992, I believe, was when it was formed. Over time, it's really evolved in two different directions. One of the functions of the committee is to essentially administer two types of programs. One is the Beautification Awards program, and the other is a grants program for neighborhoods that can supplement their efforts for beautification. Those functions really are a function of a committee that really operates these programs with the help of staff. The other direction has been sort of broader thinking about beautification in the city. And as I thought about the communication from the committee and Mr. Hertzler and how we might move forward, it seems to me that those two functions are somewhat different, and that it might be useful to have a beautification awards committee that would be responsible for operating and administering the two award programs, the Beautification Award and the Beautification Grant Program, and that could be a fairly small committee that would focus on those. The broader issue of thinking about beautification seems to me that we have two existing bodies that should be part of their mandate. That's the Planning Commission that essentially thinks about land use in the city, and the Economic Development Authority that thinks about economic development and beautification in many ways is both parts of both of those thinking. So my suggestion was to think that what if we asked those bodies, the Planning Commission and the EDA, to work with staff to come up with sort of mandates for their functions that would include beautification and make it a more integral part of what they do. And one of the reasons for thinking about that is, one, they already think about that in much of what they do, but secondly, they also have budgetary functions in there. The Planning Commission annually looks at the CIP. There could be beautification elements to the CIP that they could be part of. And the EDA has its funding mechanisms, and they think broadly about sort of both economic development, and I would suggest beautification is part of that. So what this suggestion is that we really take sort of what the current committee does and split that function, create a separate beautification awards committee that would handle those two programs, and then turn to the Planning Commission and the EDA that already have beautification as part of their functions and say, let's get more explicit about that and think about that in terms of your funding functions as well. And so that's put on the table, and I guess what I'd like to hear is thoughts from council and Mr. Hertzler, you as well, since you're the one that really started this process off. So let me first turn to council and see what thoughts you have.
The idea of giving the Beautification Advisory Committee two specific areas of focus makes a lot of sense to me, because they don't really have any vehicle to enact anything that's going to impact the longer range thinking about how to beautify the community. It has to happen in another environment. It seems to me, just at first blush, that there is one function that we're not thinking about here, and they don't have any sort of fiscal power either, but they do significantly impact the beautification of the city, and I think that's the ARB, and they're constantly working on the beautification of the built environment. And buildings don't live outside of a context. So I don't know how to work that in, and I'm not suggesting that we should, but I just think we should think about, is there an ARB place or role in here? Anyway?
I thought about that, and essentially because ARB really does look at the built environment and think, not so much about the landscaping and what have you, although that's part of what Planning Commission can do. But they already have a beautification mandate, I think, as part of their function. Now, we could certainly ask them to look at that and work with staff to see if we can enhance that in the same way. And I think that would be perfectly consistent with asking Planning Commission and EDA as well. So I would have no problem with asking all three of those bodies to think more about how we might restructure their mandates to make that more integral part of what they do.
And the other is regarding Planning Commission. They're going to look at landscape design in certain projects, not all projects, just certain, look at site plans. But they don't really, that's not where they exercise their funding. I mean, they're and really they don't have any funding opportunity. They make recommendations to City Council about the capital improvement plan. So, I mean, I think it's all good. I just think some more thought or discussion needs to be had about how those things are tied together.
And in part, that's the question, to throw it to the Planning Commission and EDA and potentially ARB to think about sort of how could they see themselves functioning in this way, and does the mandate need to change, and if so, how, and what have you. So I think that's not inconsistent with thinking about this.
And again, just at first blush, it would also be fine if Planning Commission came back and said, you know, there's not a specific thing for us to do here, but we should be keeping beautification in mind with every project that comes through. Not necessarily, well, you need to do this or do that. That's the ARB's role with guiding the architecture, but just thinking about how any one project impacts the overall aesthetic of the city.
And the problems that exist there are that, you know, Planning Commission does that sort of thing on certain projects, but not all projects. ARB only deals with certain sections of the city. They don't deal with the city as a whole. The EDA deals with economic development issues. And the question, I think, that we, if we go this direction and put to them is, will each of those bodies doing that, you know, create enough of an umbrella over beautification as a whole to satisfy the needs? And I think it will, but I think until we let them think about it and come back to us, we don't know.
Well, for me, I think, you know, again, at first blush, you know, more narrowly defining the purpose of the two subcommittees, you know, gives them a focused intent, and I think it makes it more purposeful, and thus I think it kind of gives it a little bit more legs, if you will, rather than just having a BAC, Beautification Committee, that looks for something to do, and then in that they may try to get into something that they don't have any regulatory, you know, backing to get into something. And so this, I think, defines their effort and gives them more purpose. So I like that. So in terms of process, will this go back to the Planning Commission? Will they look at?
What I would perceive is sending a communication from City Council to Planning Commission, EDA, and ARB saying, here's some issues, we'd like you to think about that and come back to us with recommendations of how you think this would work for you. And if we then get all that back and look at it and say, well, there's still a hole here, then we'd have to think about how we fill it. But my guess is that what we get back from them will be sufficient to give us an umbrella over thinking about beautification broadly in the city. But we don't know that till we see what we get back.
I think we're in the right direction.
Well, just to follow up on what Paul said and some of these other things, one of the things I've been thinking about a lot is corridor beautification. I talked to somebody at the last VML meeting, and a company who does it, and got me thinking about it. That might not naturally fall anywhere.
Although it could fall in ARB since the core districts are part of what they do.
Sure, could.
So that's.
I do think that's something that EDA thinks about as well,
and,
because
I do too.
Corridors meaning major entrance corridors.
Yeah, right, yeah.
Because they're thinking about, from a commercial standpoint, more attractive community is generally going to be more successful than a less attractive community, and how do you have the biggest impact for the amount of interference?
I just got back from a very long road trip. We drove to Michigan, we drove to New York, we drove back here, and it makes a huge amount of difference when you're approaching something, what it looks like. I mean, landscaping in the medians, and you know, the way a city looks when you drive into it, it just makes a huge difference.
And part of the thinking is behind this too is that as Paul's added now, that the ARB, but those three entities all are doing things that affect beautification.
Right.
And, we may not have been as explicit and as proactive in saying, we want you to think about this
Yeah.
and make this an integral part of what you do. And if you do, how would you do it and what have you? So I think that's why I'm suggesting this might be a way to go.
I think so long as what we create is not necessarily a policy board or, any subcommittees that create policy, that
Right.
this is more of a vehicle to make suggestions and then to reward those that have gone and made, extra effort to beautify whatever part of that, the city they're in.
And, that's one of the functions of the awards program, the function of thinking more broadly about beautification. Then it could come to council and to the budget process through the CIP. It could come through a program in the EDA where we provide finances, they have their own finance. So it seems to me that those two bodies in particular have mechanisms to get those projects into a funding stream that the current sort of mechanism really doesn't.
Yeah.
I think this is smart, just on a broad perspective, this is a citywide value, and it ought to be reflected in each of our subdivisions. So I think it's perfect.
Joe, is there anything you'd like to add at this point, since you're the catalyst for all this?
Mayor and members of council, thanks for letting me speak for a few minutes. Organizations tend to get more complicated over time, and sometimes a little bit of judicious pruning is required. And I've been on Planning Commission for a number of years, current member of City Council, and as chair of beautification for the last 2 years. A lot of what we do is redundant. A lot of what we do is covered in those other organizations. I've never been on EDA, Economic Development, but in conversation with the people that are involved in it, again, there's a lot of overlap. And it just seems to me like there's got to be some ways to simplify, this organization that we call our city. And maybe this is one thing that can be done. So, don't be afraid to do some pruning. I think there's enough, like you've all been saying, and I want you to hear this from me. I think there's enough oversight in these other entities that you've been describing that I just think beautification, there's a lot of redundancy there. The idea of maybe setting up a committee that all they do is the awards. Yeah, I can sort of see that. That is it's a beneficial thing in that you want to reward people for doing the right thing. But I almost wonder if those awards were coming from a stronger entity, like maybe, and I don't know that ARB is the right. Because ARB is supposed to be more focused on preservation, although through the corridors, ARB is definitely more, beautification. But coming from some entity that has a little bit more weight behind it, may carry more prestige for those awards, which makes them even more sought after. The last few years, the awards they've been sort of not too well attended, and people just, okay, so I got an award, whatever, and that's not what you want. You want people to say, wow, I got this award, it means something, and so if that part of beautification continues, it needs to be made in such a way that it carries some power with it too. But again, I've been involved in all these other organizations, been involved in beautification, and there's a lot of redundancy, and I do think you could do some pruning. So,
Okay.
Snip away.
So, yeah, thank you, and we'll follow up with your thoughts on the awards as well. But I think, if anybody else have anything at this point? I think what I'm suggesting then is that I do a letter or memo to the chairs of those three organizations, spelling this out and asking them to come back to us with recommendations, and then we'll take it from there. Great, thanks. The second communication is mayoral appointments. And earlier, Jody spoke about the Neighborhood Relations Committee that has been extremely useful organization. This was put together, maybe 6 or so years ago by the then Mayor Gene Seidler and college president Taylor Reevely. And essentially, the committee consists of a representative from the college, the city, the student body, residents and landlords. And two of the members who have served on that committee since its inception, Bill Talley, who served as the resident neighborhood representative, and Al Albert, who served as the landlord representative, have asked to step down. After talking with council, we have and with the neighborhood council that appoints the neighborhood representative, we have two new members for the Neighborhood Relations Committee. The neighborhood council has recommended Sharon Marcellia be the neighborhood representative, and I'm going to, after talking with council and with her, appoint Barbara Ramsey as the landlord representative. So I've talked with Carolyn Murphy as the city's representative and really ends up staffing that. I think Jeremy Martin represents the college. Do we have a student representative yet? Okay, yeah, that one hasn't been named yet, but will soon. So that committee, again, functions in a variety of ways to diffuse situations before they arise, and has been extremely useful to us. So with that, there'll be those two new members of the Neighborhood Relations Committee. Our next agenda item is schedule of meetings. Jack, anything in particular?
No, I think that you got a good schedule from Jody on all of the college meetings, but everything else is pretty much what we normally expect this time of year.
Yeah, on the Hampton Roads Planning District Commission and TPO, Transportation Planning Organizations, they do not meet this month, but the HR TAC, the Transportation Accountability Commission, is having a retreat on that day at, I believe, at 10
o'clock on the 21st.
On the 21st. So, and I'll report back to council in September as the results of that and how HR TAC is moving forward. That's the organization that spends the money from the highway taxes. Okay. Any questions on it? Okay. If not, that brings us to our final agenda item for today, which is open forum, time for anyone to address council on any items. If you'd like to do so, please come forward. I don't see anyone. Paul, I believe you have a motion for us.
I do. And before I read this, I just want to say that the intent of this will be to go into closed session, but we have a Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting coming up right after the council meeting. So rather than go into closed session, make everybody leave, and then open back up in case people wanted to stay for that meeting, we'll move to adjourn until we finish the Housing and Redevelopment Authority meeting, at which time we would then go into closed session as City Council. So, Mr. Mayor, I move to adjourn until completion of the Williamsburg Redevelopment Housing Authority meeting, and then go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing one personnel matter per subparagraph 1 concerning city manager annual evaluation, one property matter per subparagraph 3 regarding acquisition of property for economic development purposes, of which discussion in an open meeting would adversely affect the bargaining or negotiation strategy of the public body, and one legal matter per subparagraph 7 for the purpose of consultation on specific legal matters requiring the provision of legal advice by counsel concerning breach of contract.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Walton?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Thomas. Mayor Longman.
Aye.
Dr. Fryland.
Aye.
Aye.
City Council is adjourned until after the Housing Authority meeting. And do you want to take a few-minute break, or are we ready to move right into the housing authority?
I'm
Do we have